Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So, hi, thanks for coming. It's the afternoon, and you guys managed to avoid the beautiful day and come into this room. I'm very grateful. Let's see, I'm going to talk about ecological networks and our creating our ecological network research, or actually porting our research from basically notebook computers and clusters onto the Azure cloud. Basically, make the application a cloud service. And what you see here is one of our networks being simulated. The size of the sphere, these are plants at the bottom. These are herbivores. You have some carnivores up above. The nose ring on those nodes are conveniently indicate cannibalism. The size of the spheres represent the abundance of the organisms as it's changing during the simulation. The size of these cones, connecting the nodes represent the amount of food, or the feeding rates, the rate at which the node at the fat end of the cone is eating the species at the skinny end of the cone. And what you see is high-dimensional nonlinear dynamics. Basically, despite not having any DNA or government to orchestrate all these interactions, ecosystems persist over time. Species don't go extinct, and a lot of our work has been focused on why that is so. Why don't they just have huge population outbursts and crashes and stuff that you would expect from a random system? They aren't occurring in ecological systems. So we figured that out, and now we can have these simulations in computers and do a lot of science. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So this is a collaboration from a bunch of wonderful folks that based at the San Francisco State University and our PEACE Lab, our Pacific Ecoinformatics and Computational Ecology Lab. Let's see, Ilmi and Paul Yoon are right over there, who have worked a lot on this. Paul has moved our applications onto the Azure cloud with NSF support, and a lot of work done by Rich Williams at Microsoft Research. He's basically the generator of the Network 3D application and that we put into the cloud. So here's an ecological network. This is something I put together. This is actual data that I put together as a graduate student. We changed the color of the nodes to represent whether they're at the base of the food web in a lake that is algae, zooplankton, and then fishes at the top of the web. We changed the color of the links to represent the type of trophic interaction, whether it's herbivory or carnivory. And the way we represent the diversity of these networks is just the number of nodes, which is the numbers of species. We designate that as S. And the number of links is just L. And the important parameter that we use to measure connectance or complexity is connectance. And that is the fraction of all possible links that are realized, which is the number of links divided by the square of the number of species. It's a fraction between minimal and maximum webbiness. Usually it's around 15% in food webs, somewhere between 5 and 25%. And what we did, is a real important base of our simulations, is this model called the niche model. It takes the number of species in a food web and the amount of connectance in that food web and builds food webs according to 3 simple rules. And a bunch of papers that we've been publishing, and it continues to be the niche model is continuing to get a lot of use based on the idea that it builds food webs, ecological networks that look very much like those in nature. And this is the way it works. These are the 3 rules. This is the algorithm. First of all, you take the number of species, S, and you give each species a uniformly random number between 0 and 1. Basically, you place it on what we call the niche axis. They are located in niche space. Second rule is each one of those species gets a range. If it gets a big range, it's probably going to be a generalist. If it gets a small range, it's going to be a specialist. It actually comes from it's the R sub I. It's comes from a beta function parameterized such that its mean is 2 times connectance, but then whenever number you pull out of that distribution, you multiply it times the niche value, which is a number between 0 and 1. It averages to 0.5, so it gets a bunch of different ranges, but they all average to connectance, and that, or C. So that makes your web that you get out of this model have the same amount of webbiness as the parameter you put in it. Last rule is all you have to do is place this range on the axis by choosing a center somewhere between the niche value of the owner of that range and half the size of the range so it doesn't fall off. That's it. Those are the 3 rules. And it does a wonderful job of making food webs that look like those in nature. And I won't go into all the evidence, but I want to cite one of the more impressive feats that it did. That is, it successfully predicted, just based on the number of species and amount of connectance, the overall structure of these food webs that are a half billion years old. We worked with a bunch of wonderful paleobiologists to characterize these food webs from the Burgess Shale and the Chengsheng Shale and the Burgess Shale, wonderfully preserved, very famous formations with these Dr. Seuss characters, like an invertebrate with 5 eyes. This one is called hallucinogenia. Wonderful critters they figured out based on mouth parts and a lot of the same sort of stuff we use now to figure out who eats who ate who back then. And so what I'm saying is that we understand the architecture of these networks pretty well, and that it's really robust. There's something about DNA and proteins and the things that all life has been made of, is that these network structures don't change that much. There's a lot of variability, but there's a strong central tendency. So it generates realistic network architectures, which you could imagine is very useful for simulations. It provides a benchmark, so we know when a food web looks weird or when it looks kind of normal. And it forms a scaffolding for network dynamics. Namely, this is a niche model food web. And the structure came from the model, the architecture model, but now I'm going to go on to dynamics. How is it run dynamics? And it's just an ordinary differential equation that models the change in a species biomass is equal to, if it's a plant, we have different sorts of growth functions that plants can grow, but everybody loses biomass by the metabolic rate of the organism times its biomass, because it takes energy to stay alive, then plus everything it gains from eating minus everything it loses from being eaten. That's it. There's some interesting nonlinearities, mostly coming from this functional response that calculates the rate of consumption based on the abundance of the prey, but otherwise it's a straightforward ODE system that gets simulated, as you see. And one of the things we've done is with these dynamics is because network structures are highly variable, a very key parameter is body size. Let's see, and so what we can do is generate, in this case, tens of thousands of different networks, and let's see, parameterize with different food webs, different body sizes, empirically reasonable large things eating small things that we see in nature. What we can do is stuff like that. We can remove, boom, a species from these webs. And the effect of a species on a web, or what we call interaction strength, is the difference in the abundance of these nodes when that species was present minus the abundance when it's absent. That's how you know what difference it makes if it's in the web. You take it out and you measure the difference. And what happens is that you take a look at this web, actually a lot changes, but what we did is We measured about 250,000 interaction strengths inside the computer, just generating these webs, taking every species out one by one. And what we found out, and it's missing, well, there's an algorithm that we could use to predict that interaction strength just from our in silico experiments. And the prediction it depends on the abundance of the organism and its body size and the abundance of the target organism that you're measuring the effect on. Between those three numbers, you see these dotted lines? Those are our predictions, either when the removed species was very abundant or when it was rare. And here's the data from Eric Berlow's experiment when he was a grad student in blue and red dots, matching these two different conditions. And you could see that the regressions of the data really closely overlap the prediction. Namely, we were able to predict the effects of species removal on a field experiment. That's pretty cool. A lot of ecologists thought that was important. That makes what I'm going to talk about like, oh, well, they aren't just playing with equations. They might even be talking about ecology. Another example is where we applied this model. We call it the allometric trophic network model. Allometric having to do with body size, trophic having to do with feeding, network, obvious, to this Lake Constance food web. We have about 24 species, 104 links, about 18% connectance. There's fishes on the top, algae at the bottom. We have a lot of bacteria. Here's what happened is they looked at the abundance of all these 24 organisms over like 20 years, every 2 weeks. Germans are so good that way, man. They were out there, they were measuring it. And this is the year average abundance represented in the size of the spheres, a lot of bacteria, a lot of these Daphnia, not so much fish, some very rare ciliates and rotifers, and the average feeding between them over a year. But it didn't stay the same over the year. In the winter, there's not much green biomass, there's lots of bacteria, but then when it becomes spring and warms up, the plants are very happy, but then the carnivores and herbivores are even happier than the plants. They get really abundant. They knock down the plants in this pretty famous clear water phase, a really impressive, dramatic event in lake ecology, where all of a sudden the water, you can just see it. It's like, whoa, the water's nice and clear for several weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. But then the less edible algae become more abundant, and the dynamics of species just change pretty much every year. And this is what we did was each one of the phases of these periods, we just reduced to an average biomass during that phase. And so here are those same data. This is the observations, and this is what our tuned model outputs to, and it pretty much gets a similarity of 0.82. Gets it pretty well. And for these very rare species, they're rotifers and ciliates, like 5 species of each of them or 4 species and 5 species. They're pretty rare. We overestimate, the model overestimates some of them, underestimates the other, but by and large, the model does really good. And that opens up, I think, ecological forecasting, something like weather models are. You have some basic equations, maybe you have some real-time data to feed it, you keep on tuning the model as you use it to actually predict what will happen in the future. This gives us sort of a platform to go on with that. We can also look at the effects of humans in food webs. That's a pretty fun empirical food web that Jen Dunn put together up in the Alaskan archipelago of the Sanak Islands. That's something you could look at the effects of humans in food webs. But more importantly, what we want to do is look at, well, not more importantly, differently, we want to look at the effect of fishing. So instead of those, that ODE that represented biological processes, we have one that represents economic processes, supply and demand. And we can plug those into the food webs and see what happens. Here we're fishing 3 different species. The classic model used for fishing is logistic growth, just a single species that grows up to a carrying capacity. Fishing managers know that's not true, but they don't have very many good alternatives. I think our model is a good alternative. And what you have here is, with a logistic model, you have the predictions in these straight lines of the effect of percent removed on the abundance that's left in the system. And what we find in our network model is that abundance decreases a lot quicker than the logistic model. In fact, if you do what maximum sustainable yield recommends, you'd basically drive these species extinct. And indeed, that's what we've seen many times over in fisheries history. But let's see. They don't. There's a lot of statistical modeling, very little mechanistic modeling. I'm going to just go on to how many minutes do I have now? 10. Cool, great. So what I want to do is, like, I've hopefully motivated you, like, hey, these are some neat accomplishments. One of the things that's computationally intensive, and what we created was this food web 3D application that does some neat things. What people really like is that it visualizes networks, and you go to any food web meeting, almost everybody uses it because it's the best tool for that. It does a bunch of the calculations, so people don't have to figure out what, program, how do you calculate trophic level, mean chain length, a bunch of pretty major things, difficult things. And I'm just showing some. It's got actually quite a bit of, possibilities. It does a lot of neat things. But what we've done, I'm just going to kill it now, is what we've done is we've, mostly Paul, by the way, has changed this using the Microsoft Azure into application as a service, where here's the basic architecture where we store the time series in the Azure SQL. You can even get to it either through a browser or the client application that I talked about, and you could spawn a whole bunch of simulations. My student just told me that her computer turned off after 5 days, and we lost 5 days of work. And we have different ways of clusters, but basically it's a pain in the butt to run these things. Hopefully this is going to make it much easier, where when you need your data, you just query the database. So one of the things I'm going to talk a little bit more about is this world of balance. We not only use it for research, but we use it for, a game. And I think, well, first of all, I want to just make the point that it was fairly easy because it was already using Microsoft Foundation classes and stuff, so we can move it over to Azure pretty quickly. Luckily, NSF gave us one of those cloud computing supplements that gave us the resources to do it. And and then it becomes very accessible from a bunch of different other applications. One thing I'd want to note is that because there's additional parallel capabilities within Azure, you can take what is a large web, this 156 species web, which really can take hours to simulate, and on a PC, like what are we having, 80,000 seconds or something? But because the Azure Azure gives you ability to parallelize a lot of the different activities of that program, we could do it a lot quickly. And of course, this isn't even including the fact that you can get a whole bunch of food webs being simulated at once. So one of the ways you can simulate a lot of food webs is making a game out of this service. And you get it's World of Balance after World of Warcraft. And what you can do is you plant plants in a Serengeti food web, and you can buy elephants and Arabi and all these different organisms. And then you've got to manage it because it can overpopulate and underpopulate. You get gold to buy organisms. Let's see. I'm going to actually. That's right. I have. Oh yeah. Let me just see if this works, if I can get to that YouTube clip. Is this going to work? Cool. Let me see. Oh, that's not getting very big. Oh, darn. Now that it's changing. being able to see everything, but you're going to get the picture. Okay. Okay, so this is just a video of the gameplay where the person's stocking the organisms. And one of the things that's going on is, of course, we have this model running the dynamics, and so people can learn notions of ecological interdependence and the balance of nature in a very realistic manner, I think, as realistic as us ecologists have been able to achieve, I think, at this point. Let's see, they keep a score of how many species they're able to maintain. There's endangered species within these food webs. Leopards might be the most famous one. And so you can get a score and points based on your ability to manage this ecosystem. And it's a massively multiplayer game, so you can spend money, and if you got too many hippos, dump them on the neighbors, and then that player has to deal like, oh no, I just had 100 hippos invade, and they have to spend money to deal with those hippos and things like that. Yeah, especially Berkeley, and so and so you get an idea. There's the game. There's the game. So I just wanted to tell you, I think what the future of this basically cloud-enabled exploration of complex ecological networks is what I've been talking about: more games and research simulations. You've probably all heard of the Fold It game and the wonderful thing that it was. They actually figured out some really important research. I think what we're setting this up to do is so the time series of gameplay is saved, and we can mine or access those data to see who maintained the most species. And if we're going to make fisheries versions, and basically we have a bunch of people searching parameter space for us and running these simulations, and we can search it and mine those data for scientific discoveries. We're also going to integrate our models with other data. There's databases on fisheries, landings, catches, how much fish was bought for how much money in Vancouver and all up and down the coast. So we can find parameters by linking to other data. And we're also going to employ MATLAB simulations. And then if there's some real-time data telling us how much light there is coming into the lake, well, we can integrate that. Then I think the most exciting thing is the solutions that we might obtain by doing this. That is, we will find out more about the behavior, stability, and robustness of ecological networks. I think we're going to increase understanding and management of human-natural networks. And then I think the most fun is the social networks and public appreciation of ecosystems, not only economic and ecological interdependence, but I think people probably are, I think it'll increase the appreciation that, hey, I'm part of an ecosystem. Humans have impacts. What are those? What is that relationship? So in other words, one's place in ecosystems. So thanks a lot for that. Hopefully I've left some time for some questions.
You have. We have time for questions.
Good. And by the way, that species that I got, what took out the parasite, basically this guy got really big, ate these plants down to low amounts, and that caused the extinction of about half of the web. So this is like, that's the parasites can be important lesson that came from there. But.
So I have a question in terms of how do we, so each of those blobs is a species. So how many species can you handle in one simulation? I know visualizing vast large graphs is a challenge computationally, but how big can you get?
We haven't really hit the limit yet. We haven't, I mean, because there's some, right now, commonly we're dealing with tens of species. Somewhere between 30 and 70 species seems to be our sweet spot. Now, for the longest time, the last 20 years, 2 species, 5 species were what ecologists worked on. There isn't anything, it doesn't seem, we haven't found anything, we've done hundreds of species. We haven't seen any qualitative difference. There hasn't been any benefit worth the cost of going there. But computationally, I don't think there's any fixed limit. The hardware can deal with anything. It's just, it takes a lot more time.
So I was thinking, when you get to bacterial levels, you have many, just as I learned today in my own body, there's like a hotel of a lot of species of bacteria. that I would think scalability would be an issue. Another question I have is, can you take a model like this and incorporate evolutionary properties? So new species emerge to take advantage of opportunities? Do ecologists look
First,
at that?
on the microbial point, that Lake Constance is pretty much a microbial food web. It's bacteria, and so we've got. I think we do a pretty good job with microbial dynamics. And fortunately, what is a species of bacteria? No one really knows the answer, and we can functionally group them into aggregates to deal with the fact that there might be 10,000 different species in there. Now, as far as the evolution, we call it the webevolution. It will be televised with these graphics. We have let's see, we have a postdoc. I have a postdoc, Rosalind, that basically you start with a few species, let a little hopeful monster with a little bit of different parameters emerge, see if it lives or dies, and that we've been working on years. It's tricky. This stuff is really tricky. We've gotten our results, and hopefully we should have a paper by the end of the year on that subject. We can, and we are.
Anybody else?
I wasn't certain what parallelism you were using.
Okay, well, it depends which.
These species interfere with each other, so parallelism wasn't involved.
Right, exactly. So usually what the parallelism, first of all, it's everywhere from sneaker net to no parallelism. What happens is, I think the way it's parallelized, Paul, you correct me if I'm wrong, because there's so many food webs, we give each CPU a food web, and it really doesn't have to communicate communicate with anything else. But additionally, within the program, there's a lot of work that just calculating trophic level that looks at the network and looks at the amount of energy going through all the different links. That's computationally intensive, and it seems like one CPU does that. And so within even a single food web, there's some parallelism that goes on. So it's, I think, I liked your term, pleasingly parallel. Is that replacing embarrassingly parallel? Yeah, I like the semantics. Yeah, good reworking of the word. So I think this is mostly a pleasingly parallel system that doesn't really need much sophisticated discussion between CPUs.
It would be possible. Who was your colleague on this? I would think that within a food web, you could do something, since you have a large system of ordinary differential equations, and you're doing probably some Runge-Kutta method, or I don't know how it's solving the ODEs, but there's a little bit of concurrency that you can run across systems of, and you would do that.
But it might have latency issues.
Well, I would say, but you could do it like, no. Well, I was thinking within a server where you have a multi-core server, that you would do it at that level.
Yeah, I think because each node really only has to track its immediate predators and prey. That would be the level of information exchange that I guess one CPU or one core could attend to. So but this is dynamic simulations, so it's fractions of time steps that you want to keep track. Right. That might not be worth it. But theoretically, yes, each core could be a species.
Okay. Other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
He's Kwa-Sur Tom, and he's going to be talking about cloud computing as cyber infrastructure for mass customization and collaboration. I confess that when I created, I got stuck with the job of putting together the program, and we created this session, calling it environmental applications, and I stretched the meaning of environment in a number of ways, but this, we definitely wanted to make sure this paper was presented.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm very honored to be here today, and I plan to present this talk about cloud computing as a cyber infrastructure for mass customization and collaborations. My talk will be 2/3 on a specific application related to forecasting, and then the rest would be devoted to how this can be expanded into more general applications in the trend of mass customization and collaboration. So I will spend some time on renewable energy forecasting, which by itself is an important topic. Then I will present the solutions that we developed called the Forecast as a Service framework. And then, as I said earlier, we'll devote some time on how this could be expanded into more general applications. So the renewable energy, as we know, is uncertain and is fluctuating. And this diagram shows the gist of some of the issues involved. So this diagram shows the solar energy that we receive on Earth. In general, the solar energy received on the outer side of the atmosphere is pretty predictable. 4 seasons orbiting around the sun and the Earth rotate. But because of the atmosphere, the energy has to travel through. The actual amount of energy received is not predictable and it's not easy to predict. So the blue line is based on what is called a persistent model that is based on an AO clock measurement. So if things persist, this would be the line that we would follow, the power that we'll get in terms of watt per meter square. By AO5, some cloud come by and left, and we have an increase in energy. Now this is the new path. So you can see that throughout the day, these fluctuations is not easily predictable things, although there are methods to improve. And over different time horizons, we might have different forecasts for different users. So the accurate forecasting is quite important for effective utilizations of solar and wind power. One way to deal with this kind of problem is to provide backup. So we'll just absorb all these fluctuations by another system of generations, or we avoid using this. So you would have some impact on the economics as well as the deployment. The problem of solar energy and wind power forecasting related to cloud is the diversity in data and the volume of data, as many users have alerted to. So we obtain data from different sources. Federal agencies is one major source, such as DOE, different energy lab. We have national databases that provide historical data that some people use for statistical analysis. Private organizations, some environmental group also put out data. University, nonprofit organizations, international institutions, and there are companies that sell data for profit. And then, of course, a person can have their own measurements. The data types are quite varied. There are satellite images provided by NOAA, geostationary satellite images, sensor data of different kind. There are computer model data, human expertise, and these are product data from different vendors that change raw natural energy in wind and solar into electricity, and they come in diverse data formats. In addition, there's a diversity in approaches in forecasting. There are physical models that actually use the physics, fluid flow, and so forth. There are statistical models based on time series data. There are heuristic models, such as the models people use to interpret images of satellite images about how much cloud is there and how much moisture is in the atmosphere. Hybrid models that combine different combination of this, and there are different ways to deal with the uncertainty. So one major source of uncertainty is the more or less chaotic theory of the atmosphere, the atmospheric weather model. So if you have a slightly different initial conditions, then the results could be quite different, let's say, for physical models. In addition, there are diverse needs. That is, different people need different type of information in different details. Engineers need detail for design. operator needs detail for tomorrow's operations or the next week so that they can plan ahead. There are planning decisions, how much we should build for, let's say, a wind farm. And people who invest money into this need to know, is there enough energy in these locations to justify investment? So we are developing a FaaS framework, Forecast as a Service, to support on-demand delivery of renewable energy forecasts, different types, different levels of detail, and for different prices. It is our hope that if this kind of information is available, we will enhance widespread and more effective use of renewable energies. And this will be good for the environment, it will be good for energy independence. So the framework looks more or less like this, and a little more detail later on. Basically, we have 3 frameworks inside the FaaS framework. One is to handle external data. So let's say this framework is for wind power. We need weather informations. We need geographic information for particular locations. For example, mountains tend to provide more turbulence, and ocean tend to provide more moderating effect, and same with the lake. And we have different types of measurement data, and we have equipment from different vendors that change wind power into electricity. Then we have internal data that system already have done some work, and we can retrieve those without going to outside help. And this forecast generator framework try to address the needs from different users. So there are wind power users, there are wind power producers that start to sell wind power, power companies that have windmills, and potential users or individual users. We're trying to develop this with the service-oriented architecture concepts. So there are 3 frameworks within this. So each has a consumer of service within its own purpose. So there's a EDCF, SOA architecture, and then an internal data retrieval architecture, and then a forecast generation architecture implement the different stages of forecasting activities. And they are orchestrated by this FaaS controller. So in Azure, the general process is something like this, that the user request is handled by a web role, which will check a metadata repository for any information that it has. The request is put into a queue and executed by a worker role that invoked an instance of an FaaS controller, which is a WCF service. This would control the workflow. First, it will see if you need to get data from external sources. If it does, it would go ahead doing it and deposit the data in the blob storage. Then the internal retrieval framework would take data from that storage and change it into more standardized structure format. And then this generation framework will do the work using the more standardized structure format in the Azure table. So a lot of this are implemented using the WCF service. And the way to deal with the diversity of data is a 2-step process. So we get the data from different sources in different forms and put it in blob first. And then we have procedures to change that into more structured data and put it in table. And the standardized data is what we use for our analysis and forecasting and so forth. So any updates are sent to the metadata repository. So when a user makes requests, we immediately know whether we can meet that request or not. And the FaaS controller monitors and controls the workflow. To do the work, we plan to use the frequency domain approach. The time domain data is first changed into frequency domain. And we find that this frequency domain approach is less vulnerable to noises and outliers, provide more structured representation of information, and more structure representation for automated machine processing in our procedures. So the SOA concept allows us to design different layers of services. So basically, based on the user requests, we define the problem and have different tasks that needs to be done. This may be viewed as activities in workflow, and this uses different composite services, and then this composite service may be built from different more fundamental services that might be shared by other more sophisticated composite services, and fundamental services interface with the databases. So this is generally what we are doing, and the next section of the presentation will be on how we generalize this framework into more general applications. So one thing we look at is mass customizations, which is a relatively new trend in business. The basic concept is to increase the variety of products or service to meet customer needs without a large increase in production costs. So to some extent, you try to reap the benefit of mass productions, but it's not producing one or two things effectively. So we have talked about the explosion of data and so forth. So this chain from data and to information and to knowledge, all three steps can benefit from cloud computing using somewhat of a mass customized service framework. So the concept in mass customization is quite similar to SOA in many aspects. So in service-oriented architectures, we pay attention when during design on service granularity. The component, we talk about modularity. Service autonomy, corresponding activity will be component independence. Service reusability, the component reusability. Service composability, component configurability to have more complicated components coming from simple interchangeable parts. Loose coupling in both cases. Important thing, standardized contracts in SOA. It's also important to have standardized interface in mass customization. Service metadata and discoverability. The component metadata is also important, and is important to be able to be discovered. So the diagram that I just shown a few minutes earlier, this FAAS framework, can be made more generic in the sense that it can be used as a framework for mass customizations. So the external data framework collect data from different sources, an internal data source, and then the forecasting framework will be changed into a mass customization framework, which to some extent is what the forecasting framework tried to do in essence. So there are different ways that this could be useful. So already being implemented in industry is mass customized products. I think to be more important in coming years are mass customized service, delivery service from this data information knowledge chain. And another important area is mass customized learning. So right now, a lot of the custom make education program have not been implemented because of course of different reasons. We are more or less still use the mass production model in educations. So it's very possible that the mass customization provided by cloud computing through the internet can help in this sense. Another trend is collaborations. It's a new trend driven by funding sources and there's some natural reasons, sharing of resources and expertise, division of labor, separation of concerns, and collaboration is enabled by advances in technologies, in communication, collaborations, and cloud computer could play an important part. So this is another diagram that I showed a few minutes ago. that has been generalized to provide a framework in collaborations. So let's say we need to solve a multidisciplinary problem. So problem definitions, and then split up into different steps: data collection, analytics, generation alternative, final solutions. Then the next layer is different composite surfaces, and we can have composite surface built from multidisciplinary domains. And the next level is more basic fundamental surfaces in different domains and in the platform. And then we can access to databases in different disciplines. So the idea is to expand the SOA that is usually applied to an enterprise into more or less a community, such as engineering community SOA, that different disciplines in engineering can cooperate. A healthcare discipline can also use this kind of stuff. The important thing, of course, is standardizations. They need to be standardized to interface with one another. And some other SOA concepts like discoverability, reusability, and composability. So my conclusion is that the custom specified renewable energy forecast can be delivered by the FAAS framework that was presented earlier by using the Azure platform. And this framework can be viewed as a framework for more general mass customization in the cloud and a framework for collaboration in the cloud. That's all. Thank you.
Lots of time for questions. So let me ask one. I was intrigued by the your online education example for mass customization or for higher education. Do you have an idea of an experiment that could be tried? You said that you implied that there were many things that prevented that from happening in the past, but this framework can make it happen. So can you explain that a little bit more?
Okay. We are old enough to remember the internet bubble about 10 years ago.
Maybe you're old enough. But
At that time, there are different companies that were formed to do what is called e-learning, if you remember. So they provide different platforms and they provide monitoring things in the sense that they try to provide education on the internet. 10 years later, a lot of these companies folded. They no longer exist. Part of the reason is they more or less just do the technology part, did not do the content customization. In other words, I mean, if you are learning human resources, then you all learn the same thing, regardless of your ability, regardless of your background, regardless of how fast you absorb things and so forth, personality stuff. So I believe that mass customizations could help this kind of learning by taking into account of individual need, individual ability.
so is anybody trying this?
Some are. Because of this internet bubble thing, a lot of people has been having, fear about is this the same thing or is it not? So, but fundamentally, there's some difference.
So I was just wondering,
So what about your framework that you outline makes it easier to customize such material compared to previous frameworks?
Okay. The framework we developed is based on this architecture. Let me go back to that. It's based on these architectures. So we already have a lot of these components in place, taking external data from external sources, have a more or less a workflow, work out with the service, WCF service stuff, and can meet different needs take into account of requests from them to have a more custom tailored output to each individuals. Furthermore, we have this layers of services that basically we know how to build services that can attend to individual discipline and across disciplines to do composite services. We have basically the fundamental work done already. So all we need to do is to have new content using this framework, then we can apply to other disciplines for different applications.
So your framework basically sets up a workflow that can be modified according to people's needs?
It's based on the request that we set up this service. And this whole process can be used basically to meet varied user requests. So in our case, it's forecast requests. In the education needs, it could be they want to learn something, and then they provide more data from other sources. And we take into account of that and come up with an output. So it is that structure, that program that we have.
So let me ask, so you've done this with the forecasting for energy usage, which looks like a great example. Are you going to attempt to apply it to a different, pick another area and apply it? Or are you going to, how do you make this work in other places?
To make this work, I need partner from other fields. So we know energy, we know this kind of programming. We need expertise from other fields to cooperate and develop those services that is efficiently applied. So we need partners, basically.
So maybe you'll find some here. All right, any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Last presentation is Furio Barzon from a company called Collaboratorio, and this is a startup company looking at green civil engineering, basically, in buildings. They have been working with our partners in Europe, and I think it's a pretty interesting application.
Okay. I am very happy and proud to be here, so thank you to the organizers. I see Dennis here. Because probably I'm the very first not informatician presenting at Cloud Future. I'm an architect. I have a master degree in architecture, and I'm here to bring a testimony from the building industry that in the next decades, this industry will require a lot of cloud computing tools and computing in general. I am presenting here a work we are doing in Green Prefab. That is the name of the startup that the incubator Collaboratorio has prepared in the last couple of years. We are working also with other partners, and the other contribution I would like to bring is that this startup is starting from the research field in Europe, specifically in the Venus project. That was a great chance for this startup. So first of all, I'm talking about an emerging market in the world. So when I say green buildings, I think to an emerging market. A green building is a building that has received a certification that proves that it is a green building. Those are the certification in Italy. So we are talking about a mess about certification. There are a lot. There are not yet common standards about certification, but some are coming on a global scale. The world market is expressing good numbers, but especially it is in this tremendous days, it has a growing rate annual that is very encouraging. So we think that in the next 20 years, this sector will be growing a lot, with different kind of buildings, with different size of buildings around the world. So the solution that this platform I have founded is proposing is quite simple, is a technology transfer of material technologies and processes from industrial sectors to the building industry. Nowadays, it becomes very feasible if the actors, the stakeholders in the building industry, use and share a digital master model of the 3D building to produce, in this case, green buildings, and basing the production of the building on prefabricated components. So part of the buildings that are controlled in terms of quality into the factories. With this structure and model in mind, we started to producing different prototypes. This is the demo that is online. You can go and play with it. Since it is a 3D database of a catalog, a 3D catalog of components, prefabricated components that architects use like a Lego system within their CAD system, their CAD software. And with those, they produce the green buildings that we have also in the website available for the community. So 3 main concepts I have to share with you. Prefabrication is the main pillar of this system. It means we are controlling in the factory the quality of the single parts. At the same time, we are very fast into the construction site in order to deliver a high-quality building. We are talking about high-performances building, especially towards energy saving in this case. But that process of construction is controlled by what I call a digital master model. So the building is virtualized into a 3D model where each single part is connected to a database that is talking about it. It is talking about its physical behavior, who is producing this particular component, how long does it take, a set of information around a single object within the 3D model, and other sets of information for the whole model itself. We are based on an interoperable format called IFC that is now creating a community called OpenBIM. BIM stands for Building Information Modeling. So it's an open structure of data delivered by a worldwide consortium that is called the International Alliance for Interoperability, now known as Building Smart Community, based also here at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. It started here. Those digital models control the construction, but it deals with all the life cycle of the product building. So starting from conception and design, going through engineering and testing, executive output, production into the factory, realization on site, on construction site, and use of the building. That in the life cycle is the longest one. And also, the life cycle ends with the dismantling of the building. During all these phases, different people, different companies with different competencies using a lot of different softwares that not always are able to communicate each other, and a lot of problems. This platform is not available at this time in the world, except for very, very restricted players. They are using this kind of model for single building, single prototypes of high green buildings. The idea is that this model can be open and democratized to let everybody join this kind of production in the building industry. So the phases are this call it database, a part of concept and engineering, production, operation. Where is cloud computing useful for those kind of players? Surely here, during the concept and engineering, where we have a lot of different engineering analysis to make into the building. Particularly, we have 9 in this platform. Form, it means you have immersive rendering, immersive environment where you check the 3D model directly inside the model, in the virtual model. You have structural calculation, piping and plumbing, electrical energy performance. You have to check heating and ventilation, lighting, simulation of the production and realization in terms of a program of works that you will have to follow, and computation, of course. So we had the chance to enter the VNC project 2 years ago. The project will end the last day of this month, and we started to develop the first cloud computing tool for this kind of platform. We started with the easiest one that was based on a software that had already parallel computing itself. It was about rendering visualization. We asked our community that is based on an Italian community so far of 20,000 users, architects, most of them, and engineers, how they are outsourcing the services. And we find out that rendering was outsourced for 30%, but also video and virtual reality, if we count together, more of 60% of this kind of visualization are outsourced from our users. So they could be interested on using a web interface where outsourcing this kind of work. Also, they would like to use this system to accelerate project completion, of course, but also for a lack of skill within their studios. So the community of architects and engineers are already available to use 3D models, but they are using just for rendering right now, not in an integrated platform like that. So the architects enter the website, he found 3D building components, they import in their CAD software. We have a specific path for Google SketchUp, and then they upload the model inside the website, and from there they can do different things with the model and apply different tests in the model. We develop a dedicated plugin in this case in order to deal with the LuxRender, that is the rendering engine we selected for this first implementation. It's an open source GPL physically based render, means it simulates the algorithm simulates exactly how the lights move into the rooms around the buildings with no reduction of computation, and also is dealing with one of the major CADs. It's compliant with the major CADs around. At the end, the production is a single picture, a PNG picture. So we started to manage how to deal with architects and engineers that don't want at all to set complex data or virtual machines into the cloud. They need just to have a very, very simple and easy interface to connect to the cloud. And we define a very, very simple and basic system in order to expose a service toward the cloud. At the end, we understood that we needed more services for different kind of clouds that was also available into the research project VNC. At the end, we developed different infrastructure for different tools and for different resources. Exactly, we had Microsoft Windows Azure available, and other Linux-based computing resources that are related to Barcelona supercomputer and Compass's infrastructure, controlling also Open resources. A small amount, but enough for early adopters into our community. So technically, the description of this scheme is that we have a web service within our UB, the hubby, that is the name of the service, that is waiting for the job request. User submits a job, in this case, that is a file, that is a set of files, and some parameters that they have to control. And we have an asynchronous invoke that calls the service and posts delivering ID of the job to be submitted. And through ID, the service gets from MySQLDB settings and from storage the files that are needed to submit data on Windows Edge. During the execution of the service itself updates data in our server, in our DB, for user feedback. At the end, the result is this PNG picture. This is the architecture specifically within Windows Azure, but basically is master controlling different slates. What is important in this case for our exploration, and I would remark to invite more people like me coming from application sides, because the biggest problem was not in this case technological, but was to let our basic user to use this kind of technology. So also the interface at the end, the graphic user interface must be very, very simplified, even more than this. That is still the prototype we are going to deliver at the end of the month. So just to show you in 1 minute what the architects engineers do inside here, they enter on a dashboard where they have their rendering, and they need, this is also very simplified because we need to complete it with information, but they need to upload files, put a title, and select render quality low or high. They don't want to set up anything more. And at the end, they provide, let me see. I'm uploading the files the system needs. Low and high. Let's say high in this case, and Lance. This is going to upload the files, and it will start the job. It will take about 10 minutes, 15 minutes to reach a picture like that. Well, yeah, okay. This is the data center in Boston by Gary, by the way. Yeah, we are talking about pictures like that with different quality, because sometimes architects and engineers just for an internal checks. Sometimes they need it to show it to clients. In fact, behind that, let's call it business model is dealing with the different infrastructures. So if you are using this for rendering tools and you have to show to a client, you will apply for a high quality, and you will be interested also to pay this service. If you are using for very short for research purposes, you can use the Azure infrastructure for free. We are talking about very small amounts of data in this case, but there will be a community pretty large to use it. And also, they will be able to pay a small amount for this, just for rendering. But what is more interesting for us is what is happening next. So the other kind of civil engineering analysis that we are going to implement inside this general architecture. This general architecture is working for different kind of civil engineering analysis. And so within the end of the project, so in a month, we will be able to integrate partially some of the other scenarios we had into the Venus project. So the Polytechnic University in Valencia in Spain had a scenario dealing with the structural computation called Architrave. It's the software they have already ported into the cloud in the both infrastructure, so Azure and also Compasses. It is providing in real time upon 3D models simulation for earthquakes and for the static of the building. It will be the next implementation, and the third implementation is related to eco-efficiency analysis. This is the most complex activity we are following so far, and it is produced in collaboration with the Royal Danish Academy in Copenhagen, and we ported as first in the world Energy Plus, that is the energy engine that is used by the most diffused energy efficiency analysis softwares in the world. It was produced here in Berkeley by the Department of Energy. It was not ported into the cloud, so my small group of 4 people within with the approval of Copenhagen that will test this kind of infrastructure, ported this Energy Plus for the first time working in the cloud. So now we can make different kind of simulation with this Energy Plus. Especially the first test will be on different parameters. For example, the different building types that we can have, the different orientation that the building can have on the land compared to the sunlight, the different HVAC system means heating and ventilation and air conditioning system. We can have different kinds, or we can have a different range in terms of kilowatt for a square meter for heating, cooling, fans, and pumps. We can have more. It produces a lot of combination that we are able to analyze, and it can give. This system can give great, robust suggestions to architects before starting the designing phase on how the building has to be settled in the terrain, which is the plans that are most suitable for that specific situation. Producing something like 1 million combination for a small villa. So it's very intensive in terms of computing. So this occasion, the Cloud Future is the world announcement of this kind of platform. We are going to deliver at the end of the Venus project through this suite of tools, of application working online for building structural simulation, render engine, and building energy simulation too. From the first day after the project, we intend this as a commercial platform too that needs to be implemented, and so needs scientists helping us to construct this revolutionary platform for building industry. Everything is happening on a small company that is Collaboratorio, working as a private micro incubator for this kind of ideas in architecture. That is now all moving into the green prefab company that has been founded in Trento, that is in the north of Italy, one of the richest places, and a place where we have pilot cases connected with municipality standards and local prefabricators. So municipalities are very interested on this kind of platform. Also, the advisory board is growing in this activity. Let me mention Professor Vladimir Bazianak here at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, because he was one of the IFC standard founder, the interoperable format we are using for the 3D model, also participating in the Energy Plus Foundation. And those are also some that I want to mention in this occasion, some established relationships all around the world, especially Building Smart will be the main client for cloud computing, that is this International Alliance for Interoperability in this format. So basically my contribution, and I will end here, is interact more with the application, because there are great domains, great areas like the building industry controlling the 35% of the global economy that needs this kind of system. They will need this kind of system only if we are able to create an integrated platform that is going through the life cycle of the building, the whole life cycle. And we open those kind of platforms that are already existing, and we need that everybody, every architect, every company, every engineer can join such a system. Thank you.
So I was wondering if you could imagine having a suite of sensors or something that you put in your building, endorsed sensors, and they automatically uploaded their results to your cloud, and that somehow got put into this, and you told me that I'd left the window open, or it's got my refrigerator was too expensive. I mean, it was not the right refrigerator or something or other. And maybe you could have video cameras, reproduce. I mean, anyway, I just see combining this idea with sensors as a service in the cloud could be reasonably interesting.
Yes, of course. I was talking today about this phase that is engineering. So when you design the building, what you are talking stays here. So when the building has been built, this kind of building will have building automation systems inside that basically are sensors. They provide a huge amount of data that can monitor in real time what we are doing with that building. And also, they can suggest a better use of that building based upon those data in terms of energy saving, for example. They can monitor if an area of an office building is used or not, and so you can modulate the energy saving for that or the lighting. So in the next future, building automation will produce a huge amount of data that naturally will be worked within cloud environments. No way. That will happen very, very soon. But it will be much more stronger if those sensors has been planned here in this phase, not after the building has been built. So the most important things in this sector is to create the whole system. Next application into the hobby will be in the building automation.
Yes. One more.
So you've moved Energy Plus to the cloud. I'm a little confused as to the source of the parallelism. Is it the case that you're running lots of different simulations? You're doing parameter studies? And so these are, in effect, different simulations with different parameter values, or you're looking at Monte Carlo simulations with weather, or what's the nature of the parallelism?
Well, I cannot go in detail because this presentation comes before the presentation at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. So I will not go in detail about that. But porting was pretty easy, has been done also in first in the comps infrastructure. Is dealing with an amount of very limited resources within the research project so far. And so we are dealing with about 100 cores where we are implementing those kind of parametrical tests within the building. I cannot provide you, in this case, more details about how we have done into the cloud, but I can provide you privately.
Okay. All right. Any other final questions? If not, let's thank our speaker again.